Compensatory picks are out. We've got all that and more in our NFL segment with John McMullen on the Philadelphia Eagles and the NFL here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Compensatory picks have been awarded. We'll get you those. Haskins going to throw, as we mentioned. Murray not sure yet. Police in Florida have charged Patriots owner Bob Kraft with misdemeanor solicitation of prostitution, saying they have videotape of him paying for sex acts inside an illicit massage parlor. John, we know the NFL, whether he's guilty or not, doesn't like to have this kind of story out there. So you were imagining, I would assume, some sort of repercussions for Kraft, guilty or not?
Yeah, I would think so. You're right. I think the public relations part of it, unfortunately, is probably a bigger deal to the NFL. And if you think about Bob Irsay would probably be the most recent comparison when he had his issues, and I think his suspension was 6 games and $500,000. Maybe you tick that up, 6 games and $1 million, something like that. But you're going to see a pretty significant suspension, and I don't think there's any question about that. I think from a PR standpoint for Robert Kraft, though, it's going to be worse what he goes through from the fact of what he's accused of doing.
He categorically has denied any illegal activity here. Now, the video they're saying that is out there, I mean, we know what video can do to a story, ask Ray Rice, right? I mean, okay, there's nothing out there. Now there's video. All right, now you're in trouble. Do you think this could be the beginning of the end of Bob Kraft being the owner of the New England Patriots?
Well, we'll have to see how that shakes out, obviously. I think it's too early to make that leap at this stage. But if you look at what happened to Jerry Richardson, and really with the Carolina Panthers, and really that had more to do with the environment and sort of the Me Too movement just started, and the NFL felt the need to push that situation in a similar direction. We have to kind of see how this plays out. I mean, there are people saying there are bigger names involved, whatever that means. I think people can figure out the natural intimation there. I think a certain group is hopeful a certain big name is involved, but there's supposedly more names to come out. And if it keeps being front page news, as I said, from the NFL standpoint, unfortunately, they're more concerned about how it reflects on them than the real issues of the investigation, which would obviously be much more serious issues. The fact that human trafficking is going on in South Florida, and one of their owners decided to buy people who are forced to do things against their will.
John McMullen, by the way, Eagles have signed Jake Elliott and Rick Lovato to a one-year deal, so they're going to keep their special teams kicking tandem in place there, correct?
Yeah, and no surprise there. Obviously, Jake Elliott has been very successful and is a young kicker. Rick Lovato has taken over for John Dorenbos, and it's been pretty seamless the way he's been able to work in as the long snapper. So the Eagles were very happy, and they're also very happy with Cam Johnson as well. So that entire special teams group, I think there's no concerns with them.
By the way, compensatory picks, John, we're giving out today, and the Eagles got a 4th rounder, so it's pretty good there. They get the 4th round pick, and then they also got a 6th round pick as well. These are the comp picks from last year's free agency and offseason.
Yeah, and really most people projected that the Eagles would get 3 picks, and they ended up only getting 2. It's kind of I talk about it all the time. The actual formula to where they come up with these picks is not published. It's not transparent. So you kind of just guess. And by the assumption of the players the Eagles lost and the players they signed, most assumed they would get 3 picks. I think Patrick Robinson getting hurt in New Orleans affected that. And that's why when we talk about a potential compensatory pick for Nick Foles, people can talk about 3rd round, 4th round, all they want, until you see the other machinations, who the Eagles bring in, what the contracts are. It really is just speculation.
Yeah, and the people who are wondering about Nick Foles and all that stuff, if he leaves this year, they would get that compensatory pick next year. But that's only if he was to sign as a free agent, or if you trade him away, does the comp pick work into that too?
No, if it's a trade, there's no comp pick involved. That's just if he leaves as a free agent. And as I said, what that pick would end up being depends on a lot of things. It depends on the money he signs for. It depends on if the Eagles bring back a similar free agent. For instance, we talked about Le'Veon Bell yesterday. If they take on a big-ticket item like that, it's going to X out what they would get for a player like Nick Foles, even if he gets that $25 million on the franchise tag. That's how this works. So it's like if you lose a big price tag player like that, you don't bring somebody back, that's where you get a 3rd round compensatory pick. But it remains to be seen what the Eagles do in free agency and who they want to bring in. And that's why it is all just guessing games until you get to the last Friday in February, which has now become when the NFL releases the compensatory picks each year.
Yep, and that happened today. Eagles get 2. Yesterday, John, you wrote about why Le'Veon Bell to the Eagles is unlikely. Well, today, his teammate Antonio Brown is obviously – now, he has said he wants to be traded, but there's some sources out there saying, Patriots, you're not getting him. AFC North, you're not getting him. So do you anticipate – and there's also a report that at least 3 teams have already kind of lined up to get his services. So do you anticipate there being a big market for Antonio Brown?
Well, I think it would be helpful if he got off social media for a while and stopped talking, because every time he seems to go on and say something controversial, I think that hurts his value coming back. I think if you look at his salary, obviously that affects the value coming back. And you're right, Pittsburgh obviously wants to steer him much like the Eagles, and we've talked about with Nick Foles wanting to steer him away from the Giants and the Redskins. The Steelers don't want Antonio Brown in the division. They obviously don't want him on the Patriots. So that affects what you get back as well. And it's kind of up to the Steelers. You know, we can talk about this, and they've said a trade is probably best for both sides, and he obviously wants out. But they can change their mind at any moment if they don't feel they're getting value in return and try to salvage it. So I think there's still a lot of shoes to drop. And just because Antonio wants out and they said they're going to listen to offers, that's a really, really productive player they probably can't get value for because of all the issues I just talked about.
Are you surprised, though, that, okay, they're just going to let Le'Veon Bell walk? They could have put the franchise tag on him, right, and kind of made him go through this whole thing again. Are you surprised they're just allowing him to walk basically for a compensatory pick?
Well, that's a little bit different because this will be the 3rd year they would put the franchise tag on him, and each year you put the tag on. For instance, you see those numbers come out and the quarterback tag is $25 million. Well, if you tag a player in consecutive years, you have to pay 110% of that. If you tag a player for 3 consecutive years, it goes up to 130-something percent, and it becomes really, really a cost burden. So it's different. It's not just that running back number you see. It's the 3rd consecutive year they would have done it, and that's really, really difficult because the percentages go up so high. And so that's part of it. And then the second part is Le'Veon kind of showed he's playing hardball by sitting out an entire season. You don't see that very often. people willing to put up their very career and saying, you know what, I'm so unhappy, I'm going to leave $14.5 million on the table and not play at all. So I think it's different from that perspective as well.
Yeah, and then, they're in a situation, too, where they've got a really bizarre their offense is about to change before their very eyes, John. I mean, they're going to lose Brown and Bell.
Yeah, and they are two dynamic players. I mean, you could make a strong argument that was the best receiver in football over the past number of years, really 5 years. When Bell was playing, you could argue he was the best running back. And those talents are difficult to replace. The Steelers were able to do it from a running perspective and had a good year with James Conner. Juju Smith-Schuster is having a great early part of his career. He's a very good player. But as good as they are, they're not as dynamic as Le'Veon Bell, as Antonio Brown. So I don't think there's any question they're not nearly as good offensively with those two particular players in the offense. Doesn't mean you can't be good. It just means you have to go about winning different ways. And perhaps, some of it is you got to be a little bit better defensively. If you talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers and their history and what everybody thinks about Steelers football and tough Western Pennsylvania football, it's always defense first. That's completely been turned on its head in this era, and that defense has been poor. So maybe they go about it that way, get better defensively, not quite as better offensively, but the end result is maybe you have a better football team.
Now, would you see a scenario, where Howie would get creative and figure out a way to make an offer for Antonio Brown?
Well, I think he'd love to have him. I think he'd love to have Le'Veon Bell as well. I mean, from a football perspective, it's hard to find better players at those particular positions than those guys. The issue becomes the Eagles are up against it salary cap-wise. We talk about that constantly. Now, Howie does a wonderful job of manipulating that salary cap, but you can only do that for so long. And every time you sort of renegotiate deals with high-profile players, whether it's Fletcher Cox, you push that money down the road, kick the can a little bit further down the road, then you affect the cap in 2020. At some point, the Eagles got to understand that Carson Wentz contract is looming, whether it's this offseason or next offseason, and that's going to be a big, big hit. And they got to do things in a more cost-effective way, and that's generally going younger with players on their rookie deals and trying to hit in the draft. And I think we're getting to that point with the Eagles. It's going to be difficult to bring in high-ticket items.
Yeah, well, they are 32nd in the league, right, of salary cap ranked. They are the worst cap situation in Indiana. I mean, they're worse in Jacksonville. They are over the cap by $22.9 million. So the first order of business, John, I guess, is to recoup that Nick Foles money. He's on the books for $20 million in 2019 right now.
Yeah, exactly. And remember, if you tag him, that goes up to $25 million, and you have to have that space. Even if you have a trade, people talk about, you would have a trade sort of in the chamber, ready to go, and that's true. And something like that would get done at the combine behind the scenes. However, when the new league year starts on March 13th, even if it's ready to go, it doesn't matter. You still have to fit Nick Foles under the salary cap. A, you have to get him to sign that franchise tender. B, which might even be more difficult. And C, then you got to make the trade, and then you'd have some room with that $25 million going elsewhere. But you have to create that space. It's not like you can do it and say, well, we're trading them.
Right.
We don't need it. You have to have that space.
Well, and some of the things, John, let's kind of get our hands dirty for a minute here. You can work out maybe a new deal with Nelson Aguilar. He's set to make $9.4 million this season after the Eagles exercise that fifth-year option. So if they work out an extension for him, they could lower this upcoming year's number. So do you think that's something they could work on?
Oh, yeah, that's one of the logical moves. I've talked about it a lot. I don't think there's any way Nelson Aguilar is playing under his fifth-year rookie option. So there's one of two end games there. Either the Eagles cut him and move on, or he signs an extension that becomes more team-friendly, and I think that's more likely. The Eagles like Nelson Aguilar as a player, but he is what he is at this stage after 4 years. Never had more than 800 yards receiving in a season, is mainly a slot receiver, and I think he's going to move back into the slot next year. He's not getting $10 million. They're not going to pay that. So an extension is the most likely scenario, but if for some reason he wants to play hardball, he's not going to be back.
You also have a couple other – we talked about Jernigan about a week ago, but you either can release him or possibly a restructure situation for a guy like Jernigan, and then Jason Peters would be another guy. Those are two guys who have some decent cap numbers that you, in your terms, could kick the can down the road a little bit more with.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, they have to make Jason Kelsey healthy. You remember that retirement story, and he feels he's a little bit underpaid at this stage of the game, and all his guaranteed money is up on his contract, so he's looking for a tweak. And then you have to talk about bringing potential free agents back. Howie's got a lot of work to do. And getting Nick Foles off the books is obviously a big chunk to go in a positive direction, and that will happen very quickly no matter what the Eagles do with Nick Foles. But nonetheless, yeah, it's a big issue.
Yeah. And then, if they do some of the things that we just kind of talked about here, Peters, Jernigan, Aguilar, and then the Foles thing is the optimum number one situation here that they actually, they absolutely have to figure out what they're going to do there. That really kicks off the entire offseason. They really can't do much until they make a Foles decision.
Yeah, exactly. And they'll make it right away. That's what I
March
said.
5th? What is it, 15th?
March 5th is the deadline for the franchise tag. March 13th is the start of the new league year. So if you see the Eagles tag Nick Foles on March 5th, they have a deal in place. It'll probably come out before March 13th. It can't be official till March 13th. But again, you have to have that $25 million under the cap ready to go when free agency opens. Then you can make the deal and you get some of that cap relief. But nonetheless, it's difficult. And even though as good as Howie Roseman has been at manipulating the cap, and I always say Eagles fans, and I still say this, they overblow those kinds of things because he generally is able to restructure certain deals and get done what he wants. It's still a lot better if you're the New York Jets and you got a ton of cap space than if you're always trying to create cap space.
Sure, no question. John McMullen, at JF McMullen. Real quick, sources, Haskins going to throw at the Combine. Murray undecided right now. Is the Combine losing its luster? Is it? Do they have to refine this thing?
Well, I don't think it is with league personnel. I mean, part of it is you get to talk to the prospects for the first time. You get to interview them. You get to meet with them face-to-face. You get a feel for them. As far as the on-field stuff, yeah, because you have the pro days as well. And remember, the guys who aren't throwing at the Combine will have to throw at their pro days. So they get to see it no matter what. And the physical aspect of it is a lot of people in the NFL are concerned because, agents have figured out the way to manipulate the Combine, and they do that by having their players and having the guys that have signed with them trained specifically for these Combine drills. So these guys are training for everything they have to do. And it's not necessarily football related. So it is a concern from the league personnel perspective, the fact that people have kind of caught on that this is what you have to do well to be looked at very well. And guys, certain guys, scouts and personnel people are starting to think about it a better way and say, well, just because you run 4.3, you're not necessarily going to be the greatest receiver in the world if you can't run routes and things of that nature.
Yeah. It seems that in this world that we live in, Zion Williamson's shoe blows up, so he shouldn't play another college basketball game. It's funny. At what point do you say – last night, for instance, I'm calling the Cape Atlantic League semifinal game, and Wildwood Catholic has these two kids on the team that are juniors, and they're just head and shoulders better than everybody else. At what point does the junior just say, I'm not going to play my senior year of high school basketball because I'm so good? You know what I mean? It's like Zion shouldn't play anymore. I don't want to throw now because I'm too good to show you my arm.
Yeah, and it is a different generation, and there's different monetary incentives. Obviously, the money is crazy now, so people look at it from that perspective. Well, you bring up Zion, and I think it was interesting this week, and I've said it again. I think most people don't realize, and they say, you should pay college athletes and all this, and they blame the NCAA, and there's plenty to blame the NCAA for. Don't get me wrong. You can criticize them over a lot of things. But when you talk about basketball players have to wait a year, football players have to wait 3 years, their junior season, those are NBA and NFL rules respectively. And they are collectively bargained with the players' union, who has agreed to those rules. Those are not NCAA rules.
Right.
So it's sort of a give and take from a players' union perspective. You're trying to sort of protect jobs of veteran players, things of that, enter into it. So there's two sides to every story, but there's no doubt the money.
Yeah, I think that's important to note, though, Beck. I think there are people out there that think it's the NCAA that makes them play the year.
Yeah, no, they have nothing to do with it.
Right.
It's the NBA and the NFL.
Although you would think the NCAA could have some voice to say, hey, listen, you can't tell us. Like, we want to set a rule that these kids have to play 2 years here. Is that illegal?
It would be very difficult for them to do, because then it would be looked at as trying to prevent somebody from making a living from a court perspective. So the NCAA would have a very, very difficult hurdle to get over if they wanted to do that. But the professional leagues, and they're doing it, remember, they're not doing it unilaterally. They're doing it with the okay of the respective players' unions. So that's where they want to go. And they have the right to create their own rules, and they think that's the best way to go for their particular sports. And that's why they're allowed and capable of doing it. The NCAA, if they even wanted to do it, I'm not saying they do, they couldn't do it from a legal sense.
He's John McMullen. He covers the Eagles and the NFL, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen. AAF this weekend. I'm on board, 15.5. There's the bet. Take the Orlando Apollos.
Yeah, I'm on board as long as they keep playing. I'm on board. Keep it going.
Good ratings for the AAF, by the way. They had over 1 million viewers on Saturday night. I don't know who's carrying the games. Has TNT got a game?
I haven't seen the TV schedule this week.
Don't put them on CBS Sports Network. I don't get that.
CBS Sports Network.
I don't get that channel.
Network, TNT. Those are your three choices.
All right, pal. Have a good weekend, and we'll talk Monday.
All right, thanks, Mike.